Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. And this morning or this afternoon, whenever the video reaches you, we are going to look at the last night's debate between Dr. Andrew Holness and Mr. Mark Golding of the oppositional party, the PNP. Now, the debate on the whole seems to have been based rather on attacks of corruption and which party was more corrupt than the other. Mark Golding accused Andrew Holness of not having a certified Integrity Commission statutory declaration, means therefore that his statutory declaration has not yet been certified. And based on what we know, it still has not yet been certified. Unlike Mark Golding, who presented his birth certificate to prove to Mr. Holness and Jamaicans who doubt his Jamaican identity and his Jamaicanness that he is in fact a bona fide Jamaican citizen, Andrew Holness was not able. He was unable to present his certified statutory declaration, though he claims that he is squeaky clean and he has nothing to hide. So why has he not received his certificate of clearance from the Integrity Commission? And I think that the journalists who were posing questions to him should have asked him. I think that they were just, strictly adhered to the script, and they're following the script, and they're not looking at follow-up questions that needed to have been asked. Mr. Holness, Dr. Holness, since you're suggesting that you are squeaky clean and that the Integrity Commission has said so, then you need to corroborate what you're saying, your statements, by showing proof of evidence that you, in fact, have received your certified documents of clearance, but you have not yet done so. And the people of Jamaica should insist, should demand that you present such a certificate. Now, with regard to the economy, Andrew Holness seems to be out of touch with the masses of Jamaicans. Many Jamaicans experience economic difficulties with regard to transportation, groceries, and their general upkeep on a day-to-day basis. Food prices are high, yet Holness mentions about 280,000 jobs that have been introduced in Jamaica. And, Golding's debunking what the Prime Minister said was quite an interesting sort of occurrence. Now, the point of the matter is that we're living in a Jamaica in which our politicians can make statements that they cannot back up, right? Or politicians can make up statements that they cannot back up. And what is sad is that our journalists often do not keep their feet to the fire. Our journalists don't ask and they don't say, where is the evidence? Because we have not yet seen the evidence. Whatever is said, that is what the journalists accept as gospel truth. And that is what we need to understand. So it is that on that basis where I think that the debates are, not very interesting, and they prove not to be effective if they're not going to challenge, if journalists are not going to challenge what these speakers say. Okay. Now, Mark Golding was well prepared for the debate. It seems like he understood what he was about, even though it appeared as if he was nervous and a bit shy. Don't know if he were nervous or he was shy, because sometimes when Andrew Holness was debunking what he said, he tended to have been planting his head, in his notes. I don't know what he had in his notes. He didn't know what to say. He had everything written down. I did not know what was happening. But if somebody's debunking you, you have to stare them in the face. You must be able to look at what they're saying. If your head is bowed, it's almost suggesting that you're guilty of what the accusations that have been leveled against you. So that is what I was thinking, that Mark Golding should have really, been able to face Andrew Holness. For example, Andrew Holness mentioned that his party the PNP party and him, Mr. Golding, were recipients of largesse from the Cash Plus and Oland business enterprises. And Golding just had his head like bowed. You know, I don't think it was because he was shy, but he was probably trying to see what was in his notes to sort of debunk what the Prime Minister had suggested, what the Prime Minister had intimated. But the optics were not good. When we looked at his face, it's almost looking like he was culpable, and he did not debunk what Andrew Holness said. Another example was the fact that Andrew Holness told him that, you know, leveled this another accusation that he doesn't have any assets in Jamaica or any home. He has not bought any home in Jamaica. And you really wonder if that is true. Let me see if I could pull up this where Mr. Holness was actually leveling these accusations at him. I'm going to see if I can pull it up for you. So let us go on TVJ website. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see that what I'm talking about. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. Let me go back here. And we are going to come here now.
Referendum for the decision as to whether or not the CCJ should become the final court replacing the Privy Council. And that is what we think ought to be done. No other country that has moved away from the Privy Council has had a referendum to do so. And there are good reasons for that.
Our next question is from Giovanni Dennis, and it goes to Mr. Golding.
Mr. Golding, the PNP under your leadership has flip-flopped on a number of issues. For example, Julian Robinson on May 16, 2023, said the opposition takes no issue with a massive salary increase for parliamentarians. The very next day, the PNP released a statement objecting to the increase. Why should Jamaicans trust that you won't similarly make about turns on promises you are making now?
When Julian said that in Parliament, he was referring to the principle of parliamentarians getting an increase. He wasn't addressing the specifics of what was being proposed. We hadn't had a discussion around those specifics. When we looked at the details and we saw the massive increase that the Prime Minister was proposing for himself and for his ministers, we felt it was unconscionable to do that in the context where the public sector workers had just had their salary negotiations under some duress in relation to the teachers in particular, finalized, and many of them were getting 20% over 2 years. That is why we had to clarify our position, because it was not in accordance with what we thought that principle demanded. Now, over time, thinking can evolve. People change their positions on issues. So, for example, we are looking at this whole question of the 3.5 salary, the $3.5 million threshold increase. And we've seen where, as the debt target is achieved and resources can be released, it can be afforded. We weren't calling for 3.5 2 years ago, but we see that the need, inflation, etc., have happened. Cost of living pressures are there. Our evolution, our thinking has evolved, and we think that this is the right thing to do now, and we're committing ourselves to it. So, you know, I don't think the criticism is justified.
Thank you, Mr. Golding. Dr. Holness now has...
I have to call out that the leader of the opposition is telling lies. Julian Robinson stood in Parliament and said he supported the increase. Clear, and the tapes are there.
Teenagers are building businesses with AI.
Sorry, let me see if I can get this off.
Well, the only AI you know is ChatGPT. Let's be real. Most people over 40.
Secondly, he calls the increase unconscionable, yet he takes it. I, Andrew Michael Holness, did not take it. The option was available to him as well. I chose not to take it. The leader of the opposition says, I have 28 bank accounts. That is absolutely not true. The report of the Integrity Commission includes accounts that are closed, accounts that are dormant, insurance accounts, and investment accounts.
Thank you.
Right. So, you know, all in all, Andrew Holness answered his questions quite, you know, confidently. And even though he might not, you know, be telling the truth, but at least he showed confidence. Not sure why Golding was always, bowing the head, taking notes. Don't know what he was doing there. But, when somebody's debunking your point, it's very important that you're having that conversation with them by making eye contact. Now, that was something very interesting in last night's debate. Now, Dr. Andrew Holness exuded much more confidence, as I suggested, than his opponent. He displayed a command of what he's doing in government, unlike Fable Williams, his economic minister, who seemed not to have been aware of what is happening in her finance ministry, right? That is something that, we suggested that Mark Golding, was, even though he was quite prepared, but he at times was a little bit too brainiac, if you will, was, just sticking to his script. It seems like he had some things written or he was taking notes, and you have to be a little more natural when you are debating, especially as a leader. Mark Golding's revelation that the debt to GDP ratio might have been relaxed, which frees up more money for government to increase its income tax threshold, needs much more explanation and investigation. And I was very, very surprised that the journalists had not really done a follow-up question or questions on that. What is the current status of our belt-tightening austere IMF program? That is what they should have asked him, or they should have read it, found the necessary documents and, and informed the Jamaican people of what this current belt-tightening austerity is at the moment. Because it seems now that there's some lightening up of that tightening of the belt. So what is it? And, Mark Golding is suggesting that he's going to use some of that to dish out goodies. But do we just want to be dished out goodies, or do we want to restore our manufacturing-based economy where we can produce and become self-sufficient? It's not about just government giving or handing out. While that might be necessary at times in some segments of the economy, we also need to build industries that we can become more self-reliant. And there was nothing about that in both gentlemen's debate last night. They were still defending foreign investments. And even, Mr. Golding was talking about, joining up with the private sector to train people. I don't think that's a good idea. We know that the private sector is all about profit. It's not about service and developing people's capacities. They will only develop the people that they want and give them the capacity that they need. But we need much more than that when we're building a nation. And that is the whole purpose of government. And we're now finding ourselves in the hands of these private sector, I don't want to call them hoodlums, but profit overlords, if you will. Mark Golding was quite silent as regards his receipt of money from Holland and Cash Plus, which confirms my point that both political parties work in unison. Right? They work in unison. It seemed quite clearly to me that each leader, the Prime Minister and the leader of opposition, were allowed what accusations that could have been leveled against their opponent without any follow-up questions by the journalists. So they were just there, accusations after accusations and debunking one's accusations. And we still don't know if these accusations are truthful. We still don't know if Juliet Holness and Dr. Andrew Holness benefited from FinSac homes. These are still allegations. Are they true? Can the journalists corroborate that information? We still don't know if Andrew Holness has 28 bank accounts. Can the journalists please debunk or confirm that sort of accusations? These are things that we're still in the dark about. At one point, Golding leveled accusations against Juliet and Andrew of having bought homes of FinSac victims. And this is interesting, and this is not interesting, but it's a serious thing to know that he has benefited from, or is alleged to have benefited from, FinSac homes, from Holland, from Cash Plus. And if Dr. Andrew Holness lost money in Cash Plus and Holland, how much did he lose? We need to hear that. The disability questions, were poorly answered, and I am happy that Dionne Jackson Miller did a follow-up question or follow-up questions. She mentioned that having listened to both leaders, the answers were based on broad statements and principles, and they were not based on specific policy stances on how they are going to improve the lives of people who suffer from, disabilities in Jamaica. And this is what we're seeing. This is a norm to give you these broad statements, these broad generalized statements and principles. And we ought to think that they're going to grow the economy, but we don't know how. They're going to increase the income tax threshold. We don't know how they're going to do it because they have been given some money. They have more access to some money from the IMF. It seems to me that that is what they want to do, to just dish out some goodies. But we need to build our economy. And once you hear Mark Golding talking about a collaborative effort a joint effort between the private sector and the public sector, a joint public-private partnership, you know that the monies will be given to the private sector at our expense, and they're not going to enrich the pockets of the masses of people. As regards to increase in the tax income threshold, the journalists never sought to ask both parties what will they do to grow the economy. And this morning, Peter Espute penned a beautiful piece. Let me see if I can see it before I wrap it up this morning in the Jamaica Gleaner. He penned a piece on corruption, and he, made some statements about the income tax, the increase of the income tax threshold under the JLP government. Now, Peter Espute, I did not agree with his article about, voting for the less evil, because there's no concept called the less evil. You're evil or not, right? But he's suggesting that they are. Now, here in his article, Peter Espute says, remember the famous 1.5 effective April 1st, 2017, the personal income tax threshold for Jamaicans was increased from 1 million form of direct taxation. Sorry, I think the personal income tax threshold for Jamaicans was increased from 1 million to 1.5 million Jamaican dollars. The lowest pay AYE pay workers paid less income tax, a form of direct taxation. So the lowest pay or PAYE workers paid less income tax, a form of direct taxation, which of course led to a massive loss of revenue for the government. How did the government make up for the shortfall? That's the question he's asking. With new taxes, of course. That's what they do. That's what they do. So when they tell you that they're giving you something, they are going to translate that, transfer it into other taxes, that if you're not paying attention, then you are not going to see the trick or the deception in such a ploy. Okay, so this is what he's saying. There were many basic food items used by the poor, which up to that time did not attract GCT, a form of indirect taxation. To recover lost tax revenue, the government switched from direct to indirect taxation. They raised income tax threshold, but then they put GCT on basic food items. So when you think you have more money in your pockets, you don't, because you're going to pay on things that you were not paying taxes on before. And you have to eat food every day. And these basic food items, even more so. So what are we suggesting that these people are doing you a favor? They're not. They're not. In fact, this is a political ploy that you have to look beneath the surface. But many of us like to run with what we hear, and we do not think critically. The lowest PAYE workers paid less taxes at the expense of the very poor who paid more taxes. We are for the poor, the government says. That's what Peter Espute says. So the debates, in terms of who won the debates, I would say that Andrew Holness, was the victor in this one, in the fact that he was more confident and he seemed like a statesman of experience. I think, as he suggested in his wrap-up statement, that a lot of what Mark Golding is making are promises that perhaps he won't be able to fulfill. Okay, but he's in government and he's telling us what he's doing and what perhaps he will continue to do if he should win the next government election, the next general election. So that is my take back. I think that this one, for what it was, it's not that we won, the people didn't win, but Andrew Holness won this debate for him, for himself, for his family, and for the financial elites. What do you think? Who do you think won? Do you think the Jamaican people won? Or do you think it was a win for Andrew Holness and his cronies. Please let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much for joining. I'll see you in another one. Ciao.